But we'll see.
Dan Hoffman is a Fox News contributor and former CIA station chief who served in Moscow, and Dan joins us now. Dan, what are you hearing in intelligence circles about what happened?
Well, we're still in the fact-finding phase here, and what we know is that Russia launched a barrage of missiles against Ukrainian civilian targets yesterday, against the electrical power grid and throughout the country, all while President Zelensky was addressing the G20, which he called the G19 since Russia wasn't there, and discussing the war and Russia's vicious attacks on Ukrainian civilians. And so I think that what we're determining right now is whether, again, as you noted, whether this was an act of Ukraine's self-defense, air defense, possibly the S-300. President Biden noting, at least in a preliminary assessment, that it was unlikely that it was a Russian missile. But it's really a distinction without a difference if it was Ukraine defending themselves from a Russian attack on their civilian infrastructure. It's still the root cause was still Russia's military.
So where does that leave us? The preliminary assessment, the reporting suggests that the missile could have been fired by Ukrainian forces at incoming Russian missiles, so an act of self-defense by Ukraine. And now we're hearing that Poland is likely to invoke NATO's Article 4. We know that Article 5 is an attack on one. It means an attack on all, which would ultimately mean World War III. What does Article 4 mean? Because it is a bit of a softer article.
We're a long way from Article 5. And so, yes, I think we'll see the Article 4 invoked. It's only been invoked 6 times. It was invoked by a number of Eastern European NATO members after Russia invaded Ukraine. This will allow for consultations, discussions about the way forward. There are probably a number of policy options that NATO might consider, providing Ukraine with more sophisticated air defense, potentially a no-fly zone over western Ukraine so that attacks like this might not be repeated in the future and risk an escalation between NATO and Russia. But again, I think it's important that we just understand we're in the early days here, fact-finding, and we need to discuss all the facts and agree on what exactly happened before any decisions are made.
Yeah, as we look forward, you mentioned we need to prevent this from happening again. Does the Biden administration, along with NATO, have effective procedures in place to prevent a mistake from escalating to what Carly and so many people are referring to as potentially World War III?
Well, I took note of Director CIA Burns' meeting just a couple of days ago in Turkey, mediated by the Turkish intelligence services with his counterpart, the head of Russia's foreign intelligence service, the SVR, Sergei Narishkin, whom viewers may remember as the guy who got dressed down by Vladimir Putin on the eve of the invasion because he didn't get his lines right. Secretary of Defense Austin has been speaking with his counterpart, Minister of Defense Shoigu. Jake Sullivan has been on the phone with Russia's National Security Advisor, Patrushev. Those are all really important contacts. But at the heart of this, we've got to remember that, look, Russia invaded Ukraine. They're slaughtering Ukrainians in their homes, their hospitals, and their schools. And they're trying to steal Ukrainian territory. And Russia, I think it's important for the Biden administration to own the narrative here and emphasize, look, Russia's the aggressor. And part of this is we just haven't done enough to support Ukraine. I think we could have done more right back at the very beginning in the spring of 2021 when Russia started to mobilize their forces on Ukraine's border. We've just been playing catch up throughout. And this is what we've got right now, a humanitarian disaster, the likes of which we haven't seen since World War II.
Yeah, right. And despite all that, Ukraine just celebrated the liberation of Kherson, which is one of the biggest victories that Ukraine has seen since the start of this war. And you saw the Ukrainian flag go back up, flying over Kherson. That is the exact type of humiliation that Vladimir Putin hates. So with that in mind, what is your assessment of where this war stands right now?
So you're absolutely right about that. Vladimir Putin can't like the fact that this is a piece of territory that he said Russia had annexed a few weeks ago. And now President Zelensky travels all the way to Kherson, and Zelensky understands the value of public relations. He's messaging his own military and his own civilians that, hey, we're going to keep taking the fight to Russia. We're going to get back all of our territory. He's messaging Vladimir Putin, and he's messaging NATO and the West. He needs more help. What we're seeing, I think, in the coming weeks, the ground is soft and it's a rainy season right now. But I expect that once the ground hardens with the colder temperatures in winter, that we're going to see, again, more of these, the battlefield pick up the pace there, with Ukraine and Russia continuing to fight on the east side of the Dnieper River in the Kherson region, in Donbass, and who knows, potentially Crimea as well. This is a long way from being over, and that's why it's important for us to iron out the rules of engagement with Russia so we avoid any NATO-Russia escalation in this conflict that Russia has caused from the very beginning.
Right.
If you want a view as to what winter warfare looks like, just go online and look up any World War II video from when the Germans tried to make their way into Russia, and Russian winters are not good for fighting. Going back to the underlying reason we have you on here, this lack of clarity as to what happened, is this just standard fog of war situation? Or, again, I hate to say this, but my initial instinct was this is coming from Russia. We haven't really gotten good information from them throughout the war because, again, they're Russia. And I'm a little bit confused as to why the initial reports said, oh, this was affirmatively a Russian rocket, leading me to believe that there was something fishy going on here. What's your take? Fog of war or something fishy or something in between?
Well, listen, I think what happened here is that initial forensics indicated it was Russian. Because Ukraine is using the same air defense that the Russians are using, it might be hard to distinguish between a missile that was launched and the air defense, the S-300s that Ukraine is using, which is the same air defense that the Russians use. It's a Soviet air defense. And so I think we rushed to judgment. I can tell you from my own experience, having served in war zones in the Middle East and in South Asia, the last thing you want to do is jump to conclusions based on any initial facts that you think you're collecting. You've really got to do a lot of work. And I'll emphasize as well that our intelligence community, I'm sure, is looking at any indications and warnings, reflections from the Russian military about this attack. This is a time when President Biden wants to make sure he gets all the information he possibly can, engages with our NATO allies, shares the information so that we know as much as possible. The worst thing you can do is jump to conclusions, and I think, unfortunately, we started to do a little bit of that yesterday. It just reflects, I think, how much of a hair trigger this all is right now, and the concern, partly from President Biden. He's made a lot of comments about Armageddon and World War III. I think we need to show some more message discipline and avoid that rhetorical brinkmanship. It just adds throw weight to Putin's efforts to scare us.
Well, we are learning that President Biden was woken up to this news about this missile strike that hit Poland. And then together right now, Sergei Lavrov left the G20 meeting yesterday. And then President Biden said the world has come together at the G20 to urge de-escalation. Russia continues to escalate Ukraine while we're meeting. He is certainly right about that. Dan Hoffman, thank you for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.